So welcome to our Check-in and Connect with ACPTA. Today our topic is teacher perspective, appreciation, and support. We have the privilege to have some amazing teachers on our call today. And before we get started here, we're going to let a few more people in on the call just to ensure everyone is aware we are recording. And we will have this recording posted on our ACPTA website, as well as we will be pushing it out through Facebook and Twitter on our ACPTA Austin PTA site. Just to kind of get started, if everyone wouldn't mind changing their name, if they feel comfortable with how it is right now, that's perfect. Just to kind of get an understanding of what schools, if you are a parent or from a community, where you're coming from. So let me, if you go under participants, you can find your name and then just rename yourself. I'm working on that right now myself. Okay. And then the next thing, if we get to this part of our recording of our session today, if you could all just make sure you grab some materials, a piece of paper will do, and a pen or pencil to write with. We're going to do some reflection and discussion after our speakers speak today. And then finally, just please be sure to use the chat in any way you want. If you have questions or things that come up for you during the talk, please post them. And throughout this hour, we'll be asking you to post some of your questions and thoughts as we go through. So the why, for why we're doing these check-in and connect. So this has become, Austin Council of PTAs has been hearing from the community, our parent community, about some questions and concerns. And I think we're in a place right now that looks very different than what it looked like before spring break. And so we wanted to create this weekly session just to really address a lot of the questions and share information that we know, and then really kind of name the things that we really don't know right now. We want to provide this as an opportunity to meet up with people also that you might know or might meet during this time, which is good in order to continue having some face-to-face time and really kind of socializing for ourselves, because that's something that's much different right now in the spaces that we're in. And then together we want to create the space to really continue to navigate the needs of the community. So as things come up for you, we want to hear from you, and we want to know what it is that we can be bringing to the table to help, whether it's resources that we can find and help or share, or what you can provide for the community as well. So that's kind of why we're here today. So what it's going to look like, our hour together, we've invited our special guests, Mr. Wayne Lopes and Mr. Sean Hopkins, who are teachers in Austin ISD. We're going to ask them to tell us about their perspective and figure out ways that we can help support them in our quest together to teach our children. And just ways, since we know it's Teacher Appreciation Week as well, and we always appreciate our teachers, but it just so happens that this week is a week that we can explicitly share our appreciation. What are ways that we can discuss together, simple ways that we can show that to our teachers? We'll have an open Q&A with our two guests, and then we'll go into our community reflection and discussion. And this is a place where we'll kind of explore our individual and shared experiences as we're going through this time. We'll do it internally, like just for ourselves, and then we'll share ideas with each other. We'll do an ideation exercise, which is just sharing ideas with each other about this topic today. And then at the end, we'll provide you with some updates as to where we are and where we're going next together. Okay, so let's kick it off with our guests today. So I don't know if you guys, can y'all see each other when I am sharing my screen, or can you guys still see each other? Oh yeah, you can still see each other. So if Mr. Lopes wants to go first, if you can just briefly tell us about yourself, and give us a little information about why you're teaching and your philosophy and passion about teaching.
Yeah, so my name is Wayne Lopes. I'm a third grade teacher at Minchak Elementary School. So I've been teaching for about 6 years since I've lived in Austin. It's always been with Austin ISD. I come from a family of educators. So my grandma was a principal, my dad works in higher ed, and my mom works in high school. My sister went rogue and became a rocket engineer. So
Wow.
um, we're all pretty much educators, and I really enjoy it. It's just a fulfilling job, right? Like when you're teaching and you see the little kids, like, I get it. And you're like, yay. It's just those little moments, those little victories are very satisfying for me. So,
Thank you, Mr. Loves. Mr. Hopkins, would you like to
Hey,
introduce yourself?
yeah, I am a 16-year veteran of ISD, and I teach at Clint Small Middle School. I used to teach at Fulmore when Lively was Fulmore, and also at O. Henry Middle School. And I've always been at the middle school level. I've always been a Spanish teacher. But one thing I've also done throughout my career is also teaching the PALS program and support PALS and be a leadership PALS teacher. Mostly what I do now is I work in the dual language program at Clint Small Middle School. I helped to lead that program, and we founded it about 4 years ago. And it's something it's continually a work in progress. Our first cohort of students now is in high school, and some of them are continuing their dual language path, and some aren't. So that's another question. And then where I work at Clint Small Middle School, other things I do there, let's see. I've run for about the last 10, 11 years, and either here or at more in the No Place for Hate program at all these campuses for the school. I'm also the soccer coach for whatever that's worth. And I have two daughters that go to Ridgetop Elementary. One is in 5th grade, about to go to Lively next year, and another's a 3rd grader. And I love that school as well.
So you're a parent, you have a parent perspective as well that you can share with us, Mr. Hopkins.
I also do, and I feel like for full disclosure, I always need to say that because like in AISD, my relationship is also as a parent as well as an educator too.
mm-hmm.
Thank you. Well, we're going to kind of go through the top 2 questions that we would like to know from you. So first of all, kind of in your perspective, how has teaching changed for you in post-COVID? So Mr. Lopes, if you'd like to, I mean, we don't have to go round robin, but however you guys want to do it, go for it.
Yeah, I think it gives us a really interesting perspective on teaching. So when we make curriculum, we always want to make it relatable, real world. And I think teaching and learning from home with the families involved really drives that home, right? And so when I talk to my parents, I'm always like, okay, well, we covered fractions. Here's some simple activities. Have them help you cook, right? Like make it as real world as possible. So I think the authentic learning really kicks in. The fluff isn't there anymore, right? We just don't have to do that anymore. So.
Go ahead.
Oh, keep going. Yeah, you can jump in.
Okay, I'll say for me post-COVID, I think there's a difference between like perhaps elementary and secondary, because I'm here also. My wife is also a teacher assistant at elementary school, and so I'm seeing what's going on there. I'm seeing what my children are doing, and then I also know the middle school reality, which is instead of having 20 to 25 students, 160, 170 kids, and so like that little bit of a intimacy or connection or personal touch that you have with the students when you saw them every day is gone, and it's super hard to recover a lot of that. So I think that's the big challenge is that disconnection, because you can put curriculum, you can put material and stuff and activities out there to do, but it's not the same having that classroom experience. And that's the big thing I think that's changed. Yeah. And I guess the other change for me personally too is, and I think the educator here will agree, so long to do simple things. Like, for example, I used to be able to go across the hall and ask my colleague this, and now I got to figure out how to communicate with them, distance-wise. It's just a million things that take way longer. I'm also part of the dual language program at Clint Small Middle School, as all the dual language programs in middle school. The 8th graders are taking the AP exam for language and culture, and I have 60 students roughly that are 2 classes, and the logistical challenge of preparing students for that anyways is large, and then trying to do this remotely and with a changing target a little bit, and of course the exam has been really changed. So this is an example of some challenges that happen. How do you do this from a distance? It's not the same thing as doing it in person. And then also just not having that classroom experience. For me, that's the one thing I think that's that big thing where the kids are in that space, and all the magic that should happen in that space. it's hard to recreate that online.
Yeah. And I think I was telling Vanessa earlier, I think my role as an educator really has changed as well. And you touched upon this, but I'm more of a mentor to the whole family now. So I'm meeting with the parents a lot more. So when I Zoom meet with my class, it's the students, and then I'm like, okay, go get your mom and dad. And then we talk adult to adult, right? Like, this is the situation, this is the reality. We're going to be frank, right? Like, we're not doing that anymore, but how are you, right? So those check-ins, my relationship has evolved to more of a mentor relationship. So.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, not that paying attention to the well-being of the whole child wasn't always super, super important, but it was so hard to monitor certain things, or, you know, that classroom connection where you're checking on the kid. How you doing? What's going on? And also, we know that so many resources are harder to get for students, especially students of poverty in this time, that I think the role of all the teachers, and especially those elementary school teachers that have that little flock of theirs, is from the check-in, even to, I'm sure, the materials of your students. And we know that, you know, the majority of ISD students are on free and reduced lunch. So the kids count on that. That's just part of it. But there's lots of other things too. So those personal connections, they're not there. So I think that thinking on the being of the kids in a different way is in some ways more important.
Yeah, and I think the resources that every parent provides are different, right? So when we have them in the classroom, we have everything ready, we have everything prepped, and we ensure that every student has exactly what they need. But that might not necessarily be the case when we're learning at home, right? So we can't make those broad assumptions, and we want to make sure whatever we're giving is equitable and possible to do, right? Like, when we look at learning, we want to make sure that it's not so frustrating, but it's still very engaging and relevant for the parent, because they are doing those hands-on activities with the student, and also aligned for that student. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think you hit on it too, as far as, like, that's the tricky balance point as far as to prepare work and activities and meaningful instruction for kids online, is hitting that balance where you got, on one end, you have students that can barely access or can't access technology, or don't have that, or don't, if they do, they may not have the time, they may not have the space, they may have to be watching their siblings. There's a million things. And so those, we got to think about, at the same time, the other ones, the ones that are just gnawing at the bit for more work and things to do, and hey, what else can I do? And that's part of maybe what makes that kid tick, what makes that kid get through this whole experience, really, even is keeping themselves busy with this. So yeah, we got that whole spectrum. So you got to find a way to hit all of that, and that's a big challenge. And at the same time, you know, I like, for example, my campus, I really appreciate the tone that our principal, Mr. Matt Nelson, has set for the way it's supposed to be, because obviously we want rigor, obviously we want meaningful instruction, and I think for sure for the core subjects too, you know, we're all concerned about losing ground. But having said that, I think the focus for our school has always been, like, the well-being of the kid, making sure everybody's doing well first, because that's our MO anyways, which is understanding that if all of these factors are going well for this child, physically, social, emotionally, all of that, that they're going to be able to do well in their classes. And we know that at this time, you know, it's a million times, you know, times a factor of a million. So
I like how you said that. I think one of the things my friends and I were talking about was, this situation that we're in is really going to define the generation of the students. And if they have an adverse experience, like, they're going to carry that into their adulthood, their teenhood, right? So we're no longer just the teacher per se, but we want to make sure that mentorship and nurturing is there, right, to prevent any adverse effects.
So there's a question here from New. What were some of your struggles that maybe you saw during the process of trying to connect with students remotely? And are there still students that you have not connected with?
Yeah, so for me, I reached out to all of my students one-on-one. All of my students are on different levels, so I had a very heavy class with atypical students. So some of my students just don't access the curriculum online that I give, right? I do weekly readings on my Facebook, so they can view my readings, right? They still see my face. It's a lot more intimate. They get to see my dog on my couch, and they get to see my apartment, right? And it's funny because they're like, "Oh, your dog's here," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm reading to my dog," right? So I have connected to all of my students. All of my students are doing something different because their needs are different, right? I have some families that are stay-at-home moms, right? And they want a lot of work, and I have to tell them, all right, we're not doing busy work, but here's a book, right? And I'll send you 2 books. I recommend this. I have some projects on this book. Read this book to them, right? Like, this is a time to really build that relationship and get them involved in something other than just a drill and skill type activity. So, but for the most part, all of my students, excuse me, I connect with them weekly. We share, right? Like, I've seen my students' chickens, and I've seen all of their dogs now. So that's nice. That's something that I would not have done if we were not in this situation. So again, the situation has lended to different opportunities and learning, and I think we need to embrace those and just go with it. But yeah, all of my students, for the most part, are doing well. Some of them are doing apps like Duolingo and or Reflex Math. A couple of my students, my busy bees, like to do the pen and paper work. So they have opted to get the curriculum from the district, and then we do Zoom meetings. I have things online for them. So there's a variety of curriculum and resources, but everybody's at a different point in their learning. So.
All right.
Yeah, and I think there was
can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Sean.
Okay, great. As far as reaching the students, I mean, and like I said, I have about 160, 170 students, so it's a little different as far as making that many phone calls. But the campus expectation at the beginning of this was that the way we broke it down is essentially like our homerooms, our advisory classes. We all had to reach out by phone and check in with all the families, and we did that. And also just to make sure that they were aware of how to access Blend, do they have a computer and all that stuff. But, you know, this business of, like, for example, making sure everybody has technology, it's still going on. I mean, I know that people are saying they've pretty much been delivered, but I keep on hearing stories of ones that aren't. And for example, my wife, who's a teacher assistant at elementary in Austin, you know, has students that they're in contact with them by phone, and they're asking them every other day, is the machine shown up yet? Not yet. So I think that's still a challenge for a lot of kids. Even if they have one, they may or may not be able to use it, but that's another story. There's every week we have like a diagnostic report where they show at our school also like how much kids are engaged on Blend and how much they're logging into the platform and checking in and doing lessons and such. And it was doing pretty well. My understanding is this last week we had a little bit of a dip. I think it was like almost like about 90% participation on those activities on Blend. That's just kids logging in and going into that module or whatever. That tells you that it's down by about 3%. And my understanding is I think the district had a little bit of a dip last week with that in general. However, they're able to measure that. But there are a few kids that have not logged in anything of mine and have not checked in. And also too, when I'm trying to call them, for example, to find out if they're still taking the AP exam, it's very, very hard to reach. And so just as you would expect too, you know, just for the record, my particular school is about 40% free and reduced lunch. So there's a lot of those kids that are in that free and reduced lunch group that are having challenges, I think, with their technology or communication or responsibilities that they may have on their plate. So it may be keeping them from doing that.
Mm-hmm. So I see there's one more here question from Stacy Kelly. She is asking, is it by school and how your principal sort of guides you? But she mentioned how there are teachers, they're all doing different things. Like some teachers only get on for once a week for an hour via Zoom. And that's more of a check-in, more of a thing rather than a classroom learning opportunity. And then, you know, there are just different strategies that different teachers are using. And so kind of what has been the message you've been receiving as far as ways that, I mean, I know it hasn't been very long and you're still probably learning, but best practice for you or what's been shared with you from the district on how to connect?
I think in elementary school, the principal was given the autonomy to kind of meet the needs of their community seen fit, right? So for my campus, most of the upper grades, so 3rd through 5th, are either doing a blend or Google Classroom, and then the younger grades are doing something like Seesaw or Zoom. I want to be cautious in saying like this is homeschooling, because it's really not, right? Like, it's distant learning enhancement enrichment, right? So because we're all in this situation, I think that we need to go about it in a different mindset, right? There's no way we can deliver the curriculum that we were delivering when we were in school with all the students and all the resources at our hand, right? I mean, I'm in my apartment, and while I have books, right, I still don't have the means to copy everything, right? There's a lot of prep. And when I was teaching, right, I've been teaching for 6 years, I have a lot of prep work that I've done for all of those materials. I don't really have access to all of that here at my apartment, right? So when we do push out things, we want it to be very efficient. But keep in mind, for every like 1 hour of work you do, there's probably an hour or 2 of prep involved. So I just think being aware of those little nuances is important as well.
Sean, what are your thoughts on that, as far as, or do you feel like Wayne answered, or Dr. Lope, Mr. Lopes answered that question?
Not yet.
Almost. I know you're working on it. I know you're working on it.
Hopefully by the end of the year.
In reference to what the doctor said, well, I think the guiding principle at the beginning of it, because it was the first, where there was spring break and everybody's hustling to try to figure out how do we do this, what do we do, and then the 2 weeks. And so I think that there's studies that they've been using as a guide as to, like, per age, how many hours online education is appropriate per age group. And for middle school, that proper window is 3 hours maximum per day. And so what we look at it for middle school, or at least at Clinton Small, is that, okay, you have 3 hours, that's 4 45-minute lessons, or 4 45-minute activities to engage in per day. And of course, let me remind everybody that in middle school, most middle schools in AISD, not all of them, some do, some don't, probably most, do a rolling block. And so every other day, kids are used to seeing the A classes and then the B classes, the odds and even. And so the idea is that students would be working no more than 3 hours a day. And then we were also asked to put up at the most 2 lessons per week that would last 45 minutes per student for the slowest student. So I was told, imagine the student that is going to take the longest on any given assignment, and that assignment should be at most 45 minutes. So there's going to be some students, obviously, that are going to be real quick with their work, and that's just how they operate, and they're going to be done with that in 10, 15 minutes. Other kids are going to take 30 or 45 minutes to do that. So that's what we've been asked. Now, I think also too, my understanding of this, my perception of it, was that the driving force behind this was from the middle school office specifically. The middle school office, I think the elementary school office and the high school office, they were all 3 working on the plan for their level. In the middle school office, it was constantly memos coming out, don't publish this, or this is not a final draft, or things like that. But it was like, you could tell that this is like thinking out loud, the process of how do we do this? What does this look like? And at the end of the day, there was no set, it has to look like this. The only thing is that we don't want to give more than 3 hours of work per day. So however you do that. So having done that, and I always like the way my principal, Mr. Matt Nelson, takes the directives from the district and then interprets it and puts it into a form that works for our campus, for our school. You know, he just told us to do those 2 45-minute lessons per week, make sure they're not going to take any longer than that. And to me, it seems like a process of the middle school office dictating something to the principals, and then him trying to tailor it as best he can to our campus's needs.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Well, and then I really kind of want to get to the last question, which is a little bit of what Lynn is asking as well in the chat, and what's on our slide. So we kind of want to know, briefly from both of you, from each of you, how has it been for you in terms of, and this is also a news question, balancing your work with your personal life at home, your family life, and then also in that same vein, how do you feel like we as parents of children in the district can help support you and the work that you're doing with our children at home?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think I'm in a little different boat because I don't have children at home. So I have a little more time probably than the average teacher.
But you're also working on your PhD,
I
right?
am, yes. So for those of you that don't know, I'm all but dissertation. So I am writing my dissertation. I'm scheduled to defend my concept proposal the end of this month. And then if it gets approved, it's submitted to the IRB. And then if that's approved, I can start my research. So it's a process that takes time, but I'm slowly getting there. But yes, I think home life balance, it's difficult because we lose track of the day and the time, so that work life kind of gets very watered down, right? We forget that we're at home, but we're still working. So I think just being very cognizant and saying like, okay, it's dinner time, right? And I need to sit and enjoy my food and be in this moment and not think about what else needs to come, because there's always going to be work and there's always going to be something to do. I think for parents, I guess my only advice to parents is really just enjoy this time, right? Like you're with your family, everybody's in the same boat, right? And I think teachers are very aware that going back to school in the fall, we have a lot of work to do, right? Like that's not a secret. We have a lot of work to do to catch kids up and make sure that they are where we want them to be. So I tell my parents, read a book with them, right? Like that's something that I would do, and that's something that I would like you to continue to do with them, right? Have them cook something and we can share it, right? Like have them share it on Zoom, right? So this week we were talking about baking. So I have a couple friends that are really excited to share things that they've baked. And we just talked about measurement and we talked about fractions, right? So it's a lot more intimate and it's a lot more personal. And I think our relationship is it's different, right? The dynamic is different, but I like it. So I just urge parents to say like, okay, really incorporate them in what you're doing. Have them shadow your work and have them help you in different ways, right? So learning just looks differently, right? Like we're still learning in all aspects, but it's just how we're learning is different. And I think again, we really want to take this moment and define it as a moment in our history where we rose to the occasion, right? Like it wasn't, we don't want to look back and say it was a lost moment. And we can say, you know, yes, we were at home, but my teacher was checking in on us. They were sharing their dinner. We were sharing our dinner, right? It's just, there's a lot more things we can do than learning. And I know that sounds so weird coming from a teacher, but our goal has always been to learn, but just remember learning happens in all different capacities. So, yeah.
I want to echo a lot of what you said too. That was really good. The learning looks different for sure. Before I get into my answer, I just want to mention one thing is that you said about going back in the fall, but that's probably a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day. But, you know, part of this online learning experiment we're doing right now, kind of like a subtext that has been shared with me is like, okay, this is kind of like a trial run, and this is a good time for you to learn how to do this and figure out how to do this distance learning, because there is a very good chance that this will be the way we'll be beginning school in August. And so, and then obviously nobody has any definite information, but people are telling people who are telling people who are telling me, obviously, coming down the chain that, you know, and I'm sure you guys are hearing this too, the possibility of starting distance learning in the fall. Like you said too, this is a brand of distance learning. This is not homeschooling. This is very different. And I think there's a lot of good things are going to come out of that. I like the way you framed a lot of that. First of all, like, especially this elementary school relationship that you have with your students, and I have with my students too, but really with yours too. We're all, like any time as teachers, we're all being watched by the students, right? And we are here to also not only provide good lessons, and not only as teachers, individuals, as human beings, we're also trying to deal with the new realities that we're dealing with. But we have to also model emotional constancy to the students. We have to model a good way, not only this is apart from academics, but a good way of responding to this crisis. And how do you enfrentar? How do you confront this? How do you face this in a way that's positive, that looks for the good, that maintains gratitude, that keeps the ball moving forward and keeps it positive? And I think we have to model that for our students. Although I think if we take off the mask, all the teachers are going to say, man, this is tough. Man, in my own personal life, this is there's a lot of challenges here, you know, paying these bills or doing this or all these logistics. So I have to acknowledge that. Home life, I would say home life has been a big challenge for me because, listen, I live with 3 wonderful people, my 2 daughters and my wife, and we don't live in a palatial estate, so it's not like we have an entire wing where I can go off to my office or whatever, my own personal wing. I'd love to. But I did a couple of weeks ago buy a picnic table at Lowe's and put it together with my kids, and now I'm spending my days outdoors until the sun gets too hot. Yeah. So this is literally what we have to do. For the first month, I had converted half of my bedroom into like a home office, and it was great. I brought artifacts from my classroom, and it made it look really good, and I enjoyed it. But it was just like I found myself spending 16 hours in that room almost. You know, like, I mean, that was the room that I was sleeping in, which is also the room where my home office was. And the challenge here is, for me, is like the overlap of all this. I'm a person that really likes to keep the hot side hot and the cold side cold. I like to compartmentalize, you know, sometimes my personal life and my professional life. And I'm really good at, like, when I get home, I really, honestly, I do turn the motor off as much as possible. I know as teachers, we're supposed to have the biggest hearts, and we do, and, you know, we can, you know, nonstop caring, but like at the same time, I have to stop, and I have to pull back, and I have to take care of myself, because if I don't take care of myself, then I'm not going to be good for the students when they need me. That's always my mantra. So that's the challenge.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say that's my challenge, is keeping those things separate. But as far as like the learning going on and what the parents can do, look, you mentioned a lot of them, but like these home funds of knowledge, this is a good time to really appreciate all the learning that can happen from home that isn't considered quote unquote academic, but yet it has value. And we also can acknowledge, we can value that, and we can show our value and how we value that by, you know, just applauding that and acknowledging that. There's also perspective change of, like, I think parents are going to gain a new perspective of the role of teachers and what we do and all the time that we spend with kids, you know. And people were asking me early in this thing, are you worried that you're going to lose your job because, like, you know, distance learning is going to be a thing and people are just going to learn on their computers? I was like, no, there's no way. Because after about a month of this, people are going to be like, please take the children back. We love them, but we want you to take care of them because you're the expert in this. You're the one that knows how to teach children. You're the one that is the expert in all these topics that they're trying to learn, these different subjects. And plus, they need to go back to work too. So I like the fact that the involvement in their learning is going through the roof. And I think we're gonna have, there's no turning back. There's no like going backwards to where before we did this. So everything is forward. So in the future, I think there's just going to be a whole new level of engagement with the parents and the content and the way they're engaging in it. And that's positive. Also for me, it improves my relationship with parents too, because I'm having to work with parents and call homes way more than I ever used to, or probably that I even wanted to before. But now it's necessary, and that's building a relationship. It's like one of those things where even if it's a hard thing, if you've ever gone through something really hard with somebody, afterwards you have a different relationship with them because, you know, you've experienced that together. You have that common catharsis that you overcame something. And we're all doing that right now. And especially when we're engaging with school and with the children, which will, us and the parents are the ones that have the most invested in these kids right now. So I think it's just going to improve our relationships going forward. And I think it's hopefully going to bring about a lot of good changes.
Well, we want to thank you both for spending even this hour with us, because I know it's outside of your work and outside of your personal time that you're spending with us. So really, really thank you for that. We want you to ensure that you're doing self-care and reflection and also getting all of the services and SEL yourself.